Book the Third, Chapter 15, Part 3 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 15, Part 3. "Wait a minute," said Bashwood the younger. "Are you as certain as ever that Mr. Armadale is the man?" "What man?" "The man who is going to marry her." "Yes, yes, yes! Let me go, Jemmy, let me go." The spy set his back against the door, and considered for a moment. Mr. Armadale was rich. Mr. Armadale, if he was not stark mad too, might be made to put the right money value on information that saved him from the disgrace of marrying Miss Gwilt. "It may be £100 in my pocket if I work it myself," thought Bashwood the younger, "and it won't be a halfpenny if I leave it to my father." He took up his hat and his leather bag. "Can you carry it all in your own addled old head, daddy?" he asked, with his easiest impudence of manner. "Not you. I'll go with you and help you. What do you think of that?" The father threw his arms in an ecstasy round the son's neck. "I can't help it, Jemmy," he said, in broken tones. "You're so good to me. Take the other note, my dear. I'll manage without it. Take the other note." The son threw open the door with a flourish, and magnanimously turned his back on the father's offered pocket-book. "Hang it, old gentleman, I'm not quite so mercenary as that," he said, with an appearance of the deepest feeling. "Put up your pocket-book, and let's be off." "If I took my respected parent's last £5 note," he thought to himself, as he led the way downstairs, "how do I know he mightn't cry halves when he sees the colour of Mr. Armadale's money? Come along, dad," he resumed. "We'll take a cab and catch the happy bridegroom before he starts for the church." They hailed a cab in the street, and started for the hotel which had been the residence of Midwinter and Allan during their stay in London. The instant the door of the vehicle had closed, Mr. Bashwood returned to the subject of Miss Gwilt. "Tell me the rest," he said, taking his son's hand and patting it tenderly. "Let's go on talking about her all the way to the hotel. Help me through the time, Jemmy, help me through the time." Bashwood the younger was in high spirits at the prospect of seeing the colour of Mr. Armadale's money. He trifled with his father's anxiety to the very last. "Let's see if you remember what I've told you already," he began. "There's a character in the story that's dropped out of it without being accounted for. Come, can you tell me who it is?" He had reckoned on finding his father unable to answer the question, but Mr. Bashwood's memory, for anything that related to Miss Gwilt, was as clear and ready as his son's. "The foreign scoundrel who tempted her, and let her screen him at the risk of her own life," he said, without an instant's hesitation. "Don't speak of him, Jemmy. Don't speak of him again." "I must speak of him," retorted the other. "You want to know what became of Miss Gwilt when she got out of prison, don't you? Very good. I'm in a position to tell you. She became Mrs. Manuel. It's no use staring at me, old gentleman. I know it officially. At the latter part of last year, a foreign lady came to our place with evidence to prove that she had been lawfully married to Captain Manuel, at a former period of his career, when he had visited England for the first time. She had only lately discovered that he had been in this country again, and she had reason to believe that he had married another woman in Scotland. Our people were employed to make the necessary inquiries. Comparison of dates showed that the Scotch marriage, if it was a marriage at all, and not a sham, had taken place just about the time when Miss Gwilt was a free woman again. And a little further investigation showed us that the second Mrs. Manuel was no other than the heroine of the famous criminal trial, whom we didn't know then, but whom we do know now, to be identical with your fascinating friend, Miss Gwilt." Mr. Bashwood's head sank on his breast. He clasped his trembling hands fast in each other, and waited in silence to hear the rest. "Cheer up," pursued his son. "She was no more the captain's wife than you are, And what is more, the captain himself is out of your way now. One foggy day in December last he gave us the slip, and was off to the Continent, nobody knew where. He had spent the whole of the second Mrs. Manuel's £5,000 in the time that had elapsed, between 2 and 3 years, since she had come out of prison. And the wonder was, where he had got the money to pay his travelling expenses. It turned out that he had got it from the second Mrs. Manuel herself. She had filled his empty pockets, and there she was, waiting confidently in a miserable London lodging, to hear from him and join him as soon as he was safely settled in foreign parts. Where had she got the money, you may ask, naturally enough? Nobody could tell at the time. My own notion is, now, that her former mistress must have been still living, and that she must have turned her knowledge of the Blanchards' family secret to profitable account at last. This is mere guesswork, of course, but there's a circumstance that makes it likely guesswork to my mind. She had an elderly female friend to apply to at the time, who was just the woman to help her in ferreting out her mistress's address. Can you guess the name of the elderly female friend? Not you? Mrs. Oldershaw, of course." Mr. Bashwood suddenly looked up. "Why she should go back," he asked, "to the woman who had deserted her when she was a child." "I can't say," rejoined his son, "unless she went back in the interests of her own magnificent head of hair. The prison scissors, I needn't tell you, had made short work of it with Miss Gwilt's love-locks, in every sense of the word, and Mrs. Oldershaw, I beg to add, is the most eminent woman in England, as restorer general of the dilapidated heads and faces of the female sex. Put 2 and 2 together, and perhaps you'll agree with me in this case, that they make 4. "Yes, yes, 2 and 2 make 4," repeated his father impatiently. "But I want to know something else. Did she hear from him again? Did he send for her after he had gone away to foreign parts?" "The captain? Why, what on earth can you be thinking of? Hadn't he spent every farthing of her money? And wasn't he loose on the Continent, out of her reach? She waited to hear from him, I dare say, for she persisted in believing in him. But I'll lay you any wager you like, she never saw the sight of his handwriting again. We did our best at the office to open her eyes. We told her plainly that he had a first wife living, and that she hadn't the shadow of a claim on him. She wouldn't believe us, though we met her with the evidence. Obstinate, devilish obstinate. I dare say she waited for months together before she gave up the last hope of ever seeing him again." Mr. Bashwood looked aside quickly out of the cab window. "Where could she turn for refuge next?" he said, not to his son, but to himself. "What, in heaven's name, could she do?" "Judging by my experience of women," remarked Bashwood the younger, overhearing him, "I should say she probably tried to drown herself. But that's only guesswork again. It's all guesswork at this part of her story. You catch me at the end of my evidence, Dad, when you come to Miss Gwilt's proceedings in the spring and summer of the present year. She might, or she might not, have been desperate enough to attempt suicide, and she might, or she might not, have been at the bottom of those inquiries that I made for Mrs. Oldershaw. I dare say you'll see her this morning, and perhaps, if you use your influence, you may be able to make her finish her own story herself." Mr. Bashwood, still looking out of the cab window, suddenly laid his hand on his son's arm. "Hush! hush!" he exclaimed, in violent agitation. "We have got there at last. Oh, Jemmy, feel how my heart beats! Here is the hotel." "Bother your heart," said Bashwood the younger. "Wait here while I make the inquiries." "I'll come with you," cried his father. "I can't wait. I tell you I can't wait." They went into the hotel together, and asked for Mr. Armadale. The answer, after some little hesitation and delay, was that Mr. Armadale had gone away 6 days since. A second waiter added that Mr. Armadale's friend, Mr. Midwinter, had only left that morning. Where had Mr. Armadale gone? Somewhere into the country. Where had Mr. Midwinter gone? Nobody knew. Mr. Bashwood looked at his son in speechless and helpless dismay.